Well, I wasn't really expecting this. I mean, what I said at the end of my crying on the inside review was kind of meant as a joke. I wasn't exactly expecting fiction on why Twilight wasn't crying during that scene in Tanks for the Memories to actually pop up. And then I remembered, oh, this is the Brony fandom, and we thrive on shit like this. So in no time at all, we had this story, I'm Not Either, written by Ponywrites, a story that was directly inspired by R. Whale's story. And boy does it fail to measure up. Yeah, I'm not exactly going to be subtle about this one, but this story is not very good. If we ignore the comparisons between the two stories that Ponywrites is inviting by stating that their story was inspired by the other, as a standalone, it falls prey to a lot of the same criticisms I leveled against Fanfic in my last review. So what's the plot for this one? Well, it's basically the same framing device as Crying on the Inside. During the crying scene, Twilight begins to have thoughts about why she's not crying, what she thinks about the scene, and how it affects her. It turns out that Twilight doesn't have a lot of good stuff to think. I mean, Applejack started out kind of depressing, but she got out of it and the story ended on a rather uplifting note. This one, on the other hand, well, let's take it step by step. First, there's the way Twilight's portrayed inside her own mind at this moment. I do not in any way believe that this is Twilight who is thinking this. She has a haughty, I'm above it all attitude that just rubs me the wrong way, emphasized when she starts to consider a lack of empathy in the story, and even the fact that she may be a sociopath. I'm not a psychologist, obs, but I'm under the impression that someone who was sociopathic or psychopathic wouldn't be aware of these particular flaws. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on that front, but it really does seem like someone who has a lack of empathy or an understanding of emotions in general wouldn't think about it in those kinds of terms. That, and really? Twilight of all ponies? Yeah, I'm sorry, I just don't buy it. Even back in Season 1, when Twilight was an antisocial introvert who was more interested in studies than in friends, she still demonstrated the basics of empathy and understanding, showing concern for other ponies when it seemed like they were in danger or having a problem. She might be a pony of logic and science, but she earned the title Princess of Friendship because she understands things like empathy. I take a lot of umbrage with a story that is portraying itself as a moment from the show inside a character's head, and completely failing to actually feel like something a character would think. So that's already a pretty big problem with the story, the fact that the character who is having these thoughts definitely doesn't sound like the character from the show. But unfortunately, it gets a bit worse. What exactly is Twilight using as a frame of reference for comparison to Rainbow's temporary loss? The fact that she is immortal and is eventually going to outlive everyone she knows and loves. Excuse me a moment. Sorry, I just have that gut reaction to fics like this nowadays. Back in Season 3, Twilight got a new set of wings, the title of princess, and became an alicorn. Given that Celestia and Luna were already confirmed to be over 1,000 years old, that sparked the obvious question. Was Twilight immortal now? And in the intervening time since, this has been a very, very popular topic with artists, writers, and creators of all kinds in the fandom, to the point where, not long after the question was raised, all the potential was thoroughly tapped from the idea tree. Nearly every potential avenue for this discussion has been explored, and they've all run the gamut from interesting, well thought out, and thought-provoking, to cliché, wishy-washy, and poorly explained. What I'm getting at is, we've seen it all when it comes to this trope, and I've seen a lot more creativity in stories surrounding the idea of alicorn ascension than immortality itself. And that being said, this story does absolutely nothing new with the concept. In fact, it's just about as predictable and gratingly pointless as you can get. Twilight's sad and upset because she's going to outlive her friends. The end. But because the story wants to push its word count over 1,000 words, this fact is constantly repeated over the course of the tale. That is the only point of substance in all of its 1,500 words. This story isn't much longer than Crying on the Inside, but it feels like it drags on for a whole lot longer, specifically because it feels like it needs to keep repeating itself. that wasn't an issue with crying on the inside because it always felt like Applejack's thoughts were moving in a steady, logical progression, indicated by the escalation she goes through. Resentful, depressed, angry, apologetic, and finally accepting, helped by the fact that the main crux of her thoughts, the loss of her parents, was a very relatable problem. Here, Twilight never moves forward in terms of her thoughts. She is constantly stuck in this resentful, pity-me attitude about her immortality, and she never has anything more to say beyond that. It gets tiresome very quickly. That's not even going into the little oddities, such as the random mention of shipping about halfway through, or Twilight's weird penchant for casually cursing. The entire thing feels more like a mouthpiece for the author's thoughts rather than Twilight's, and in doing so it stops being a character piece about what Twilight would be thinking at this moment in time, and becomes a rather poor attempt at trying to shove headcanon into an established moment in the show. Square peg, meet round hole. I guarantee the two of you will not get along well. At the end of the day, I just can't recommend this story. There's just nothing here to make it stand out positively. It relies on a pity-me headcanon scenario where Twilight's an immortal, a trope that's widely overused in the fandom as it is. It fails to make me feel as though the character who's thinking these thoughts is Twilight, it's redundant, and it just takes a much more cynical look at the moment and the character that makes the whole thing feel far less than genuine. If you want a good peek into a character's head, I still recommend Crying on the Inside. That's a great story. This one, though, give it a pass. And if anyone else is gonna write stories based on this moment, don't send them to me. I'm kinda done with this moment. I got other things to do. Really, I do.